Hello, and welcome to Why Am I Like This? The podcast for those who didn't get enough hugs as a child. I'm Laura Wood, and I'm a trauma therapist.
And I'm Michaela Beaver. I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner.
Michaela, why are we doing this podcast?
I am so glad you asked. We want to help you understand yourself a little bit better. How the things you learned about yourself and the world in childhood are still affecting you today. We want to figure out, why are we like this? Those random things about ourselves that we might wonder about, like, why am I so jumpy? Why am I so anxious? Why do I take everything personally? Why are my thoughts so negative? Why do I feel like I have to fix everything all the time?
Yes, and that's actually what we're talking about today. We're talking about fixing things, and we're going to try to answer the following questions. Why do I feel like I need to fix everything all the time? Is fixing things a coping mechanism? And how do I stop fixing things that aren't my problem? So let's get into it. Why do we feel like we need to fix everything all the time? Why are we doing this to ourselves?
Such a good question. It's such an energy burner, like feeling like we have to take on the world's problems, don't you think?
I do. Is it a control issue? Is it like about I need to control everything? Or, can we just not tolerate imperfection? What's going on?
Well, I think it could be any of those things. But I almost think it could be an avoidance strategy. Like, I don't want to work look inside me. And so I'm going to look at everybody else and fix everybody else. And not to say that everybody that people who fix everything don't think that they have problems. It's just, they don't want to look at them.
Yeah, I think that's onto something. I think about that sometimes as a therapist. I'm like, am I helping other people to avoid my own stuff?
Maybe. I think sometimes I help other people because it helps my stuff.
Ooh, yeah.
And so it's like, it's like almost like, oh, that's like me. So I understand that, or I know someone like that. So yeah.
Yeah. I always say life is a traumatic reenactment, right?
Me
So we're fixing everything that relates to our own stuff. So it's like, if somebody comes to you with a problem, you're like, oh, I can solve that and I can get you a different outcome than I had. And that will help somehow relieve my trauma response.
Totally. Yeah. Wouldn't that be nice if that was true?
I know. I would love it if it actually worked that way, but it turns out it doesn't. And solving everybody else's problems actually does not help you resolve and reprocess your own trauma. It just is a reenactment.
It is. And so I think that that's one thing. I think it's an avoidance strategy. I think that we don't want to look inward. And so it's really easy to just be talking about everybody else, trying to dig in and figure out what's going on with you and how do I help you?
Mm-hmm.
But I also wonder if it helps us to fill a void. We feel like something's missing too. We just we don't do well in silence, right? We don't do well when things are good. We want things to be bad because that makes us feel something. And then maybe when things are good, we feel weird, it's not safe to be calm, right? We've talked about that before. And so we have to fill this void of need to get our adrenaline going again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes sense. If everything's okay, then what's my purpose? Mm-hmm. Right? What am I supposed to be doing if there's nothing to do? I think a lot of times people do struggle being calm because maybe in their childhood, things were never calm. Everything was chaotic and everything was, there always had to be something going on and you always had to have something to do and you couldn't just relax.
Yeah. So what would that make a kid think? If they would learn that they can't relax. And so they would think that they need to keep stirring things up and making it more activated as an adult because that's just how they're used to feeling.
Yeah, the feeling of chaos is familiar and we gravitate towards things that are familiar. And also if it doesn't feel like, if everything's chaotic all the time and I'm trying to relax and I'm like, oh, I found like this peace and quiet, but then all of a sudden somebody comes in and things get crazy again, then I might feel like it's not okay to be calm. Or if
Mhm.
I'm being hurt at home, like, or if somebody's hurting me relaxing might just be like inviting the hurt to come because like there's nothing else going on. The other thing I think about is that sometimes we aren't able to get the attention that we need in childhood. And so making things an emergency is like the only way to get our parents' attention. And so if I constantly have a big problem to solve, then that's the only time I'm actually getting any kind of attention.
Yeah. And so then that's a learned behavior
Mm-hmm.
that's being continuing to play out for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I was thinking about that might make us want to fix things all the time, and this is like, I have a very close relationship with my mom. And as an adult, we talk about a lot of things. But in childhood, we don't want to put too much on our kids. And sometimes it can be hard not to make that mistake. But I think that like sometimes as, a parent, we might come to our kid with problems and they might interpret that it's their job to solve them. Do you think that, I mean, one of the reasons why like this was my job that I learned from a young age that like, mom's not okay and I need to help her. Maybe I'm prying into things and mom doesn't know how to like, not tell them stuff, but because they're seeing it. And so then they're trying to help. Maybe some kind of scenario like that.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, like being the peacekeeper or being like the person that everyone comes to deal with like your stuff. When you see like, even if let's say your parent didn't put anything, like it's not like a projection of like this is going towards the kid. Like I'm like as the parent, I'm telling my kids all the problems. Like even if it's not like that, and it's just that you have a lot of distress as a parent, your kids are going to see that and they're going to try to fix it. They're
Mhm.
going to try to solve for the distress, even if the parent does have good boundaries and is like, it's not for you. Like, it's okay. I'm fine. Like they're going to try to fix it anyway. Like, because the worst thing in the world for a kid is for their parent to be in distress.
Right. Well, and I think that, they definitely read us and they like want us to be good because when we're good, we're fun and we hang
Mhm.
out and we have a good time and they know that if mom's happy, if dad's happy, then like things are fun and things are good and I want that.
And things are safe.
Mhm.
And when mom and dad are good, things can be healthy and predictable, and things can be okay, and things can be calm in the house. But if they're not, then we don't have that calm. And we think that calm is just like a myth. Like I remember feeling like when I had little kids, I remember feeling like calm was just a pretend thing that people talk about sometimes.
I
I
feel
was I was like, what even is that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, I have no idea how to be relaxed when I have all this stuff going on. And I always felt like I can't relax because if I relax, then something's going to go wrong and I'm not going to be prepared.
sure.
And I hear that all the time. Like, people need to be prepared for what's next.
Which I think that there is a difference between planning and preparing and worry. And this is something that I talk about with clients all the time. I'm like, we want to plan and prepare. We have a big presentation at work and we want to be ready for it, right? But
Mhm.
if we're sitting there and thinking about stuff that's outside of our control, then that's worry. And that's
Mhm.
not the same thing as being prepared. And so we're tricking ourselves into thinking that it's planning and preparing when it's really not. It's something else.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, I think that you don't have to have the worry in order to have the preparedness.
Right.
So your nervous system is misunderstanding that, right? So when we are in distress, our nervous system is activated and we're either in hyper arousal, which is like we're upregulated, we have more energy, and maybe that's nervous energy, or we're down regulated and we have less energy, which is like avoidance or like depression or like feeling like just like blah, like I'm not going to take care of anything. And so either way, that's an activation of our nervous system when it doesn't need to be activated. So basically, our nervous system is missing the message that like things are okay and you can be safe. And so the hardest part of that is to actually believe that your situation that you're in is safe without having to fix all the problems or without having to do all the things or without having to like take the next step. But like basic safety is literally like, I'm not in any danger right now. And I think sometimes people confuse like basic safety with like that everything's good.
Right.
And that's not always true.
Yeah, it can't be
Mm-mm.
because there's a lot of things that aren't going to be solvable. There's a lot of stressors that are going to be ongoing that you can't fix or you can't do anything about. And so you have to be able to learn that, like, okay, in this moment, I'm safe. Like, there's nothing dangerous right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And when you know that there's nothing dangerous, then your nervous system can get into its neutral state and have a balance of the arousal system so that you can be alert and active and aware, but you don't have to be hyper aroused and like overly anxious or overly excited, or you don't have to be like so worried that you're just like shut down and feeling overwhelmed. Like you want that like balance of the middle, which is safety. And when we're trying to fix everything all the time, we're basically saying, I can find safety if I just fix this next thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just need to fix this and then I'll be okay. I just need to fix this and then I'll be okay. Right. Like, if I fix this, I'll be okay. But we don't know in that moment, the thing that we're missing is I can be okay even if this problem isn't solved.
Yeah, I love that. I think that that's something you do really well at teaching, like, especially like kids,
Mm-hmm.
working with them and being like, hey, did you know that you can be okay if you don't finish that? Or
Mm-hmm.
if this doesn't happen, right? Like if you don't get the toy, did you know you can be okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a hard one.
It is hard. And most of the time the kids are like, what? No, I can't. And then I'm like, well, let's see. And we can test it out. And so a lot of times we have to test out our theory of whether or not we can be okay. When we're just learning how to be calm and stop fixing things and stop trying to solve all these problems that are maybe not my problem or not a problem at all, or not a problem worth solving. When we're just learning that, we have to like try it out. We have to take a baby step into, okay, I'm not going to do anything about this and I'm going to see what happens.
Mm. So that would cause a lot of distress in some people if they didn't do something
Mm-hmm.
in that moment.
Yeah.
How would they learn that they could be okay then?
They would just have to notice, like, I didn't die. Nothing, like, I didn't get hurt. I didn't, get nothing. The world didn't end. And these are like, we want to try practicing on benign things that aren't actually like emergencies, right? If it's an emergency, like, please handle it.
Right.
But if it's not an emergency, we don't have to do everything right away. Like, I always wonder if it's difficult or if it's dangerous,
Mhm.
or is it urgent, or is it an emergency, or am I just trying to solve it in order to cope with my feelings? Is it just my feelings, or is it the actual problem? And most of the time, it's my feelings that I need to address and not the actual problem.
Right. The actual problem will still be there tomorrow.
Yeah, or it will resolve itself on its own. So sometimes I ask myself, like, what would happen if I didn't solve this problem? If I just let it go, what would happen? Sometimes the answer is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I can't think of a good example right now, but I'm just thinking about like the little nitpicky things that we have about each other, like our spouses or something, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the way that they're chewing or the way that they're breathing, or like where they put the towels or whatever, or like the way they fold the towels. Like, I don't know, right? Like, those are like not important problems. Those are like, oh, okay, this is just a thing that's kind of annoying and I can be okay even though that thing annoys me. Like, I don't need them to change their behavior in order for me to be okay.
Yeah, even though sometimes it doesn't feel that way, right? Like, man, if you don't fold that towel correctly, I'm not happy.
Right. Like they're doing it wrong.
Mm-hmm. Why do we
It's
have,
objectively wrong.
we have to fix them?
Why do we have to fix that? I don't know. So even if they're objectively wrong about the way they fold their towels, we still can let them be wrong and the world did not end and nothing bad happened. You know, maybe my linen closet doesn't look exactly the way that I want it to, or whatever. Like maybe I can't fit as many towels on that same shelf as I wanted to. But like, okay, right? Like
Right.
sometimes I say like that really doesn't matter. Does this really matter? Is this how important is this? How big of a problem is this to
Big
solve?
deal, little deal.
Big deal, little deal. There's a workshop, there's a worksheet that I give little kids that's called sizing the problem. And so is it a tiny problem? Is it a small problem? Is it a medium problem? Right? Like, so there's, and then sometimes there's a big problem and then sometimes there's an emergency. But most things fall in the category of like small to tiny.
So what happens when we really, really believe that that linen closet is a big deal? Right? We're like, this is going to end the world, right? Like, or whatever it is. Like, but yet, like, even though we logically know that it's not, there are some things that we like emotionally really believe that like it has to be this way.
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. I think if we're sticking with the linen closet example, we can say to ourselves that it's okay for me to be uncomfortable with this. It's okay for me to not like this. I can let that be, I can be okay with that. And in order for our brain and body to agree with that statement, sometimes we need to find congruence. So what I mean by congruence is like, if I am looking at this linen closet and I'm like, what's the worst part? Like, what's the worst part about it? Is it that it's wrong and it has to be right? Like, or is it that it's not my way? Like, what's the worst part? Identifying the worst part. And then when you identify the worst part, this is like an EMDR technique, but like kind of floating back to see like, where did I learn this? Why do I think this needs to be done a certain way? Oh, is it like rules from my childhood? Like, is it because that's how it had to be when I was growing up? Is it because, you know, there was some kind of event that this is reminding me of? And so when I get congruent and I recognize like, oh, I'm actually just repeating something from my past.
Right.
But I don't have to. I can choose to let this go and make this part of my present and part of my future. I don't have to let this be. I don't have to repeat this thing from my past.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes me think of like OCD and like, trying to quell the need for control and that like whatever you can do to make your anxiety feel better. And then if folding the towels that way, oh, okay, that made me feel good, then our brain's like, oh, that's something to pay attention to, right? And that's how we kind of get into those habits of doing things over and over again, is because it relieves some kind of anxiety, right?
Yeah, it's a coping mechanism, right? It's a relief of my distress. If I can just change the way this towel is folded, then I won't be in distress anymore. But what we really need to learn how to do is manage our distress inside of ourselves and not like it's not about the towel. The towel doesn't have control over me. I have control over me. And so I can use my coping mechanisms that I've learned, like my calm place, or I can use my imaginary container. I can use my breathing techniques.
Right.
So like I can move through this distress. And then if it pops back up in my head, I can be like, oh yeah, I already solved that. I solved for the distress. So I'm okay. This towel is just this towel. That's hard to do.
It is. It sounds easy, right?
Right.
But I think it takes some time for our brain to recognize that it doesn't need to be distressing anymore.
Mm-hmm. It does take time to recognize, and it takes habits. It takes like, we have to process the fact that we're changing something. We're doing something differently. We have to process that this isn't the same as it was before. So like, a lot of the time I hear people say, well, I react this way, right? Like this is like somebody might tell me, well, I don't like to go to restaurants. I just don't like restaurants. When I go to a restaurant, I feel panicky. Okay. You don't have to necessarily, right? Like you can change that if you want to. We can work on that. Like it doesn't have to be a permanent thing about yourself. Like these are states, not traits. Like these are a state of being, and states of being are temporary. And so if you can address the state, then you can find change. And so we have to consciously tell ourselves like, hey, I'm doing something differently right now. This isn't the same as before.
Yeah. And getting back into the present moment and
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that this isn't the past is also helpful in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. So like if I'm trying to fix everything as a coping mechanism, then sometimes I'm trying to control what's around me because I don't feel like I control what's inside me. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to fix everything on the outside in order to feel better on the inside.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, you know, anxiety is something that everybody experiences, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it's a normal thing that our body does. And I know we've talked about this before, it doesn't feel good.
Mm-mm.
And so it takes time and it takes practice to start to try learning these things and using them, which can be hard when they don't work right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when they don't work right away, we get disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we feel disappointed, we don't like the way that feels. And so it's like we feel like we set ourselves up to fail. And then it's just one more thing we can't do well.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate that feeling, right? But we can realize that doing something over and over and over and over and over again is necessary, because the first time it might not work. That doesn't mean it's failed. It just means it was the first time.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't made that connection yet in our brain. We haven't wired that synapse. We haven't built that ridge yet. And so when we do that over time. We don't do that in one and done. Just like we didn't learn the habits one time.
No, definitely not. So if we can use the skills and they can work, then we can calm our nervous system and use a different coping mechanism rather than trying to fix the towels,
Mm-hmm.
trying to fix all the things around us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's helpful. What can you think of any other reasons why we might want to fix things all the time?
I think sometimes we want to fix things because we think they have to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm a perfectionist and anything less than perfect is not okay, then I might be running around trying to fix everything all the time in order to like settle myself down, and in order to like feel better about the way things are, in order to avoid feeling like a failure. Sometimes the opposite of perfectionism is feeling like a failure, right? So like I always need to have everything perfect, and I always need to have everything done well and done the right way in order for me to not feel like a failure.
Yeah, that makes sense. The other thing that I was thinking was worrying about not being needed anymore. That's
Mm,
another reason, like kind of that stirring up that like fear of abandonment kind of thing. Like, this is my role. And if you don't need me to fix these problems, if I'm not, trying to dig in and figure out what's going on with you and how to help you, then you are going to leave me because you don't need me anymore.
oh yeah, that's a really good one. So we need to be important. Like, this is my purpose. This is my role. I'm here to make everything better. And if I can't make everything better, then you won't need me and you won't care for me anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that come from?
Um, well, I think that that's a complicated question. I think that like I think it probably comes from something in childhood where um we felt abandoned. We felt like people would leave us if we weren't important enough to them, right? Like maybe a parent that like is a really high achieving, hardworking parent. And, I wasn't helping around the house or helping solve your problems for you or doing something for you, then I didn't get attention.
Hmm.
Then um that makes me feel important, right? That makes me get attention from you. Kind of going back to that.
Yeah, achievement. I think about perfectionism and achievement kind of on the same layer, right? Like if I'm trying to achieve things all the time, I'm always striving for the next thing. I'm always trying to do better. I'm always trying to go one step further. And like some of that is a good thing, right? Like we want to strive,
Mhm.
but there's an unhealthy way, like there's an unhealthy level of that too, right? So what we want is a balance, just like with our nervous system. Like we need hyperarousal, we need hypoarousal. Like those are important, but they're not sustainable, right? They're not things that we need to have on all the time. They're on when we need them. So the same is true for achievement. Like we want to be able to achieve and we want to have that as a like as a balanced, part of our life, achievement and, celebration, but also just knowing our inherent value is us as a person and that we have value even if we're not achieving things. And I think that's a hard thing to learn if achievement was the best way for you to get attention as a child.
For sure. Well, and when you were talking about that, what I was thinking about was, people like that are in their like 30s and 40s and or maybe early 20s, but they're working towards something. They're really, really trying to achieve something. And they're like these high functioning anxiety people that are just literally in fight or flight all day long, constantly, because they have so many different ways they're being pulled. And that nervous system response being on constantly can lead to adrenal fatigue. And
Mm-hmm.
so they're like at some point, like our levels of cortisol are going to be high, at some point during the day. Maybe it's right before bed, and then we get that second wind, and then we get more work done, and then over time that cortisol just gets drained, and then our body's not able to mount that response anymore, and we're depleted.
Mm. Yeah. And then we're totally drained. We're totally burnt out.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm fixing everybody's problems all the time and I'm never focused on calm and relaxation and just living my own life and being settled, then I can completely burn myself out, literally, physiologically, not just mentally.
Right.
Yeah. I think when we are addressing this within ourselves, we want to ask ourselves, like, which of these is it, right? Like, what is the benefit? What's helpful about fixing everything? What's important about it to me? What does it say about me that that I'm fixing this thing? Like, what does that mean about me? Does it mean that I have value? Does it mean that I'm a good person? Does it mean that people will care about me and people will love me and they won't leave me? um right, like what is that thing? That's what we need to ask ourselves.
Or if I'm not doing this and fixing all the things, then I must be a failure.
Mm-hmm.
And so then once okay, this is kind of my deal. This is why this is the problem I'm trying to solve. Then you can circle back and say, I don't have to solve that problem. Like that's not a problem that needs to be fixed. That's not my problem to fix.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I can be okay even if I'm not doing that thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when I want to stop solving a problem or when I want to check in with myself, like, is this something that I need to be dealing with? A lot of the times I'll ask myself, okay, what problem am I solving? Like, what problem am I really solving? Is it I'm solving that, the towels are folded wrong? Or is it that I'm solving a logistical problem about like how to get my kids to school or when to pick them up or something like that? Like, what's the actual problem that I'm solving? Or am I just anxious and I need to be doing something?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes we don't really even know when we're in it.
Well, and I think sometimes what the problem we're trying to solve isn't always the problem, right? Like we're focusing on this thing, but really it's that like, I hate my job, right?
Mhm.
Like we're trying to do all these other things to make ourselves happy. And that's not really the problem.
Yeah, that's the avoidance strategy that you talked about earlier.
Yeah.
Like if I'm avoiding dealing with the fact that I hate my job, then I'm going to be like doing all this extra stuff around and sort of fixing everything else because I can't fix that.
Or you don't think you can fix it.
Yeah. Or I can't, there's something going on in my life that I can't control.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm trying to fix everything that I can control in order to kind of make up for the fact that I'm out of control in this one area. Like, let's say a loved one is sick, or, my kids are struggling, or, things are difficult at work, or something that I can't really do anything about, but I have to just kind of like let the process wait out. Like, I remember when I was selling my house,
Yeah.
like just feeling like I needed to do something all the time because there was nothing I could do about waiting until the process was done.
Yeah. It's hard to wait.
It's hard to just let it go.
Mm-hmm. That's another podcast.
Why can't I let stuff go? Maybe that's our next episode.
Yeah. So we can try to identify what we're trying to avoid or what problem we're trying to solve. We can tell ourselves that we don't need to solve that problem, that we can maybe like sit on it, wait, see what happens if it's not an emergency. And we can use our coping skills to help calm our nervous system down so that we're not in that fight or flight state and going into burnout. What else can we do to help ourselves stop fixing things that are not our problem?
I like the idea of just waiting a few minutes. So like if I feel like this is urgent and I just set a timer for 3 minutes and see if it's still as urgent after 3 minutes is over.
That's good.
And if you wait 3 minutes and your system hasn't already kind of processed through whatever was going on, then maybe go solve the thing, do the thing. But what helps is the waiting period, because it actually allows your system enough time to like distract itself or kind of naturally flow through the emotion of it all. And so waiting 3 minutes and doing something else during that time is a way for you to cope with the distress without even recognizing that you're coping with the distress.
Okay.
So that's another one.
I like that.
Yeah.
I think that fits. I mean, just talking about like being in distress and like walking away from the problem, like you're getting dysregulated from you're going to have an argument with your spouse or whatever. And you're like, okay, I just need to run to the bathroom really quick. I got, give yourself space to just get regulated, walk away so that when you come back, you handle it in a mature way.
Yeah. You need a pause. It's like hitting the refresh button, hitting the pause button, and just going back to it with a clear head or with clear eyes. Because if the problem is truly a problem, it'll be there when you get back. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah. So fixing things as a coping mechanism is a high use of energy that we maybe don't need to use. What if we could just let it be unfixed and relax, and then prioritize the big problems, right? Sizing the problem, prioritize the big problems, and let go of the small problems. I think we would all be a little bit more regulated.
Definitely.
It's a hard thing to do, but with practice, it will work.
I'll have to be thinking about that over the next few weeks of like, what is this, a big problem or a little problem?
Yeah, sizing the problem. That's one of my favorite things. Like, try that first and then see if you can let go of some of the little stuff. Thank you for listening to Why Am I Like This? If you like our show, please leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast platform. Follow the show and share it with your friends. This episode was written and produced by me, Laura Wood, and Michaela Beaver. Our theme song is Making Ends Meet by Thick as Thieves, and a special thanks to Benaviri Counseling and Coaching and Active Healing Psychiatric Services for sponsoring this show.